BYU has had immense success over the past two seasons. In 2020, the Cougars went 11-1, and they finished with a top three scoring offense that scored 43.5 points per game, and finished with a top four scoring defense, which only allowed 15.3 points per game. This team was led by quarterback Zach Wilson, who went to be drafted by the New York Jets in the first round of the 2021 NFL Draft. And then there was this past season, 2021, where the Cougars went 10-3. They had a top 30 scoring offense, scoring 33.1 points per game, but their defense was lacking, and they allowed 24.8 points per game, which was 52nd in the nation, and in total yards, they were 70th in the nation, as the Cougars allowed 388.2 yards per game. It was the first time that Elisa Tuiaki's defense was outside of the top 50 since he took over in 2016, which was also Kalani Sitake's first season. So really, last year, BYU had their second best season in the Kalani Sitake era while carrying the worst defense of that era, which I think points to a bright future, as that entire defense, all 11 starters, return, and the majority of the offense returns as well. BYU returns 85% of their production from the 2021 season. And teams that are around them, such as Bowling Green, South Florida, Southern Mississippi, Stanford, Syracuse, Troy, Massachusetts, they don't have the same amount of talented players that BYU had last year returning, and I don't think they have as good of a coaching staff. Kalani Sitake is an underrated head coach in my opinion, and his offensive coordinator, Aaron Roderick, who is developing Jaren Hall right now into a very good QB, but he also developed Zach Wilson into being one of the nation's elite quarterbacks. And when Jeff Grimes was the offensive coordinator at BYU, he was the quarterback's coach and passing game coordinator, and I think he is going to be a great offensive coordinator. Continue to learn and grow and improve there. He's already doing a great job. And defensive coordinator Elisa Tuiaki obviously knows his way around the program, knows how to coach a defense. And BYU, importantly, has more of an identity than a lot of those other programs with returning production. They like to run a power spread. They like to be modern on offense, but like to run the football. And on defense, they like to be versatile. They aren't afraid to use hybrid players or versatile players if it means that they can get the ball back and they can get a critical stop and help them win the game. So I think all those things just really help BYU, and I think that they can potentially make a college football playoff run. I don't think they will reach the playoff, and I don't think they'll be undefeated, which they'll need to be to make that playoff run. But we'll talk about their schedule toward the end of this video and why BYU can make a playoff run if they go 12-0, because they have five Power 5 opponents, on that schedule. But without further ado, we're first going to talk about the depth chart of the offense and the defense, and then get into previewing and predicting the schedule, talking about that, and ranking each position group. So first and foremost, let's start off with the defense. On the defensive line, you have Tyler Batty, who led the team in sacks last year with 3.5. Tyler Batty also had 43 total tackles and 1 forced fumble. You also have Gabe Summers, Atunaisa May, Caden Hawes, or Earl Tuatoy Mariner. That's what the defensive line lineup is likely going to look like. Caden Hawes also had 1.5 sacks, along with Atunaisa May, and Hawes also had 2 passes defended and a forced fumble. He had 31 total tackles. May had 26. Or Mahe, pardon me. And I think that this group needs to improve at rushing the quarterback. They only had 20 sacks last year. When you play in 13 collegiate games, only have 20 sacks. It's not even 2 sacks per game. And yes, their schedule wasn't just a bunch of cupcake teams, but you still have to get to the quarterback. You have to pass rush the quarterback, got to drive him out of his mind sometimes, because that is how you get the ball back to your offense. And BYU, again, they weren't even top 70 in total defense. And that statistic right there, along with the scoring defense being outside the top 50, those will improve if BYU can get better pressure on the quarterback. And all of the defensive line starters, including the two deep guys, returned from last year, so I expect this to certainly be the case. The one positive about the defense was their turnover margin. They averaged 1.5 turnovers per game, so forcing 1.5 turnovers per game. They had 5 fumble recoveries, 15 interceptions, and they forced 8 fumbles, so in reality there's an extra 3 fumbles that the defense did force there. They just weren't recovered. That's the defensive line. Linebacker is where it gets interesting, but I don't even think this is the most impressive position to talk about. At linebacker, you have Peyton Wilgar, Keenan Peely, Max Tooley, or Ben Bywater. All a bunch of solid guys. BYU returns, I think, 15 of their top 16 total tacklers from last season, which is just huge on defense, especially for fundamentals. Ben Bywater led the team in total tackles with 102. He also had 1 sack. Max Tooley, another linebacker, was second in total tackles with 68. He also had a sack, 3 passes defended, and a pick. Peyton Wilgar had 57 total tackles, 1.5 sacks, 4 passes defended, 2 interceptions, and 1 forced fumble. And Keenan Peely had 31 total tackles, 1.5 sacks, and that's it. So the linebacker room, the article that I'm reading, which helped me preview the depth chart and honestly helped me talk about it. It's a really interesting and good read. It's better than just looking at ourlads.com, which, although helpful, doesn't provide any insight on why these players are there. It just lists the depth chart. So I'm going to link both the post-spring defensive depth chart and offensive depth chart down below. So there'll be 2 articles linked down below. But the linebacker room, the article says that these guys could, all 3 of these potential starters, specifically Peyton Wilgar, Keenan Peely, and Max Tooley, or even Ben Bywater, could have 3 NFL players in this room. Peyton Wilgar and Peely were held out of spring as they continue to recover from surgeries, so it'll be helpful to have them at full strength and full health this fall. Now let's talk about the hybrid players. The hybrid players will normally be seen when BYU lines up in a 4-2-5 alignment. These guys can play as a linebacker, they can play as a safety, some can line up at the cornerback position. The most notable player is at the Cinco position, and that is Chaz Ayu. Chaz Ayu had 39 total tackles, 2 passes defended, an interception, and a forced fumble. And he's quite the player, and it's good that BYU has him back. And then there's the nickel position too. At Cinco, you also have George Udo. At nickel, you have Caleb Christensen and Jacob Boren. Chaz Ayu, you see him lining up in a hybrid linebacker safety position. He was 6th on the team with 39 tackles last season, and he had a first quarter interception over the win against rival Utah. Caleb Christensen was in the portal, but he's still enrolled at BYU and is a crucial piece at nickel and at special teams. Jacob Boren also lined up in the cornerback spot as well. So a lot of versatile guys here, and we're going to get to the cornerbacks now, and this is what I think is the most impressive position, primarily because of Caleb Hayes. Caleb Hayes is a lockdown corner. He had 12, or 11 if you look at ESPN, but it's impressive nonetheless, pass breakups, 12 or 11 of them in a schedule that contains several Power 5 opponents with good quarterbacks, like Arizona State, like Virginia. Washington State had a solid quarterback, with Jaden DeLora. Baylor, Gary Bohannon, not the greatest, but still a good quarterback nonetheless. USC facing Keaton Slovis or Jackson Dart. I mean, BYU, they play solid schedules, don't get me wrong. So seeing stats like that much of a lockdown corner in Caleb Hayes is impressive. And he returns. He didn't leave the team. He returned. He had 26 total tackles, according to ESPN. Definitely a star player. And pairing him with D'Angelo Mandel, who had 36 total tackles, 4 passes defended, where he was second on the team in that category, is going to help this defense grow and push forward, because the defense was BYU's critical weakness last year, but it wasn't anything bad or unforgivable, honestly. It wasn't like this defense was bottom 100, and returning all of these starters is more of a head scratcher than, oh, these guys can improve. They were average last year, they're going to be above average to great this year, which is what I think is going to be the case. And then at safety, you have Malik Moore, Amon Hanneman, or Hayden Livingston. Safety has more depth, and at corner, I forgot to mention this, but 2 cornerbacks medically retired, in Keenan Ellis and Shimon Willis, but the top of the cornerback depth, as we already discussed, is just absolutely impressive. They just can't afford injuries there. At safety, again, Malik Moore, Amon Hanneman, or Hayden Livingston. Malik Moore, in this past season, he was definitely a good player. 3 passes defended, 3 interceptions, 32 total tackles, so watch out for him. Malik Moore silenced any critics last season with his play at free safety. Very good. And he was a developmental skill position player on the offensive side, and then converted to defense and did as well as he could. The other 2 guys, it's yet to be determined between Hanneman or Livingston which one of them is going to be that other safety. That's the defensive preview. Again, BYU having a very versatile defense. That "or" word is used a lot, but that's because even if some of those guys don't start, they're definitely going to be seen on the field with the versatile defensive schemes that Ilaisa Tuiaki draws up. And then there's the offense. The offense is the more exciting part because it's the team's natural strength. I mean, you have an NFL quarterback in Jaren Hall, for one, and I think that I just think it's going to be great. But there's not as much to talk about because it's more clear-cut who the starters are going to be. You don't have the same rotations that you do on the defense, and probably for a good reason with how good the quarterbacks and wide receivers are, at least in my opinion. The offense is definitely stronger than the defense, so the defense still has its strengths. Jaren Hall at quarterback. He passed for 2,583 yards, 20 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and he had a 78 QB rating according to ESPN, which was 15th in the nation, and he had a 156.1 passer rating. He also had 307 rushing yards on the ground for 5 yards per carry, and 3 rushing touchdowns with a long of 56. So that right there, I've watched him play, but just those stats to tell you that he's not a run-first QB, which you don't necessarily want. He is good at passing, but he can scramble if need be and make plays, and that's what you want at quarterback, is a playmaker. Jaren Hall is certainly that already, and with another year under Aaron Roderick, he is going to take a big step forward. So I'm excited to see how Jaren Hall looks. Running back is where it hurts because of the loss of Tyler Algier, who's now off to the NFL playing for the Atlanta Falcons. He had 1,606 rushing yards for 23 touchdowns, nearly 6 yards per carry, and he also had 200 receiving yards. So it hurts, but transfer running back Chris Brooks is likely going to be the starter, followed by the number 2 guy being Lapini Katakoa or Jackson McChesney. So that's an area to look out for. It's an area where there is some uncertainty at running back. BYU returning so much production, it is weird to see a key player not returning and there being someone completely new here. It's the same thing with Kingsley Suamataya, I think is how you pronounce his name. Pardon me if I pronounce that wrong, but He's a transfer from Oregon, looks to be starting at offensive tackle, and there's less uncertainty there because of just how talented he is. But it's a new guy, new faces, chemistry's never a guarantee, etc. So I'm curious to see how the run game goes, but the pass game, including the wide receivers and quarterback, is something that is going to be exciting and explosive. You have Gunnar Romney, Puka Nacua, Chase Roberts, or Keanu Hill. All those guys are contending for the 3 starting wide receiver positions. Puka Nacua and Gunnar Romney were first and second on the team in receiving yards, respectively. Puka Nacua had 805 receiving yards for 18.7 yards per reception and 6 receiving touchdowns. Gunnar Romney had 594 receiving yards, 17.5 yards per reception, and 3 receiving touchdowns. The loss of Neil Powell hurts, certainly does. He just had just over 500 receiving yards and was tied first on the team with 6 receiving touchdowns. But Keanu Hill is certainly a guy who can step up and replace him. He had 343 receiving yards, nearly 20 yards per reception at 19.1, and 2 receiving touchdowns. So plenty of guys at wide receiver to step up. You have Gunnar Romney, Puka Nacua as the main 2 guys. And honestly, with the steps forward that I think Jaren Hall's going to take, most of the offensive line returning, and less certainty at running back, I think there will be a BYU wide receiver, more likely than not Puka Nacua, who does pass that 1,000-yard mark. At tight end, you have Mason Wake, who's more of that heavier fullback tight end hybrid kind of guy. Wake did have 14 receptions for 148 yards and a touchdown. He also had 3 rushing attempts for just 8 yards. And then you have more of your standard tight ends in Dallin Holker and Isaac Rex. So a versatile, deep tight end room too. That always helps, not just with blocking, but with receiving as well. Just look at arch rival Utah. Utah and BYU both have great tight end rooms, and Utah especially last year was able to utilize their tight ends to help with blocking, help with receiving. Dalton Kincaid for Utah is certainly a name to look out for. I mean, Utah's tight ends and their tight end room is phenomenal, along with Georgia's and Michigan's nationally, I would say. At offensive line, an area that is going to be solid. BYU had a very good offensive line last year. I expect it to be the same this year. Blake Freeland, Clark Barrington, Connor Pay, Campbell Barrington, and Kingsley Suamataya look to be the starting lineup. Jaren Hall last year was only sacked 13 times. Baylor Romney was only sacked 2 times. It's a total of 15 sacks. And seeing how the rushing attack had nearly 2,500 yards, 5 yards a carry, and 30 rushing touchdowns, that speaks volumes of the offensive line performance. Good blocking, both in the rush and pass situations. This offensive line returning most of its starters and getting a key piece in Kingsley Suamataya. He being a near 5-star prospect out of high school, felt homesick, wanted to return to BYU, at least that's what I heard, and that's certainly going to play both to his advantages for development to go off to the NFL and the program's advantage in getting a solid offensive lineman. You also have kicker Jake Olkroyd, who had his struggles last year, only completing 69% of his field goals, but he returns as well, so it always helps special teams to have returning players. With all that said, I want to get to the prediction for BYU. I think that they're going to beat everyone on their schedule, but they're going to lose in an upset game to one of their better group of 5 opponents, or possibly on the road to Oregon. The games that I look for as being losses, if BYU is as good as I think they will be. I have them at number 6 in my top 25. At Boise State, at Oregon are the games that I would say I would be the most concerned about. I think that hosting Arkansas and Baylor, I have Baylor at 11th and Arkansas at 9th. I think that those are going to be games that you're going to see the strongest version of BYU show up. Now, it's going to be hard, the stretch, having Notre Dame and Arkansas back to back, but I think that BYU is going to be showing up for those games, and with the amount of returning production they have with their staff, which, having them as an A- just means they're one of the best in the nation. They have a solid QB room, wide receiver, and running back room. Their tight ends are great. Their offensive line is one of the best in the nation. And their defense is certainly above average to good. Their main weakness, I would say, is special teams. It's their main weakness. And if you want to have a weakness, it depends on who you ask, but look at Alabama. They've had special teams weaknesses forever, but since they're so good at everything else, they win national championships. It's important to have good special teams, but I think if you're BYU, you would rather have that than some other positions. You'd rather have bad or average special teams than have a bad or average defense again. So I think that this team is going to be good. It's certainly one of the better teams in the nation. I think the loss to Boise State, it's a game against one of their weaker opponents. In my point of view from this, after beating Baylor, Oregon, Notre Dame, and Arkansas, BYU is probably going to have some kind of a down week after facing all of those opponents. And Boise State is a slept-on team, too. They return a ton of production as well. And despite, I think, having 5 or 6 losses last year, they were a good team. They beat BYU on their own home field last year. They're well coached. But a loss, you could switch that out for a loss to Oregon too, or even to Arkansas, Notre Dame, or Baylor. I think this team is actually capable of going 12-0. Do I think they're capable of winning a playoff game? Absolutely not. That's an entirely different challenge on their own. But this is, in my opinion, a top 10 team. I can't wait to see how BYU does. I hope they live up to this prediction, not just because it's, nice to be right, but because it would be cool to see. It would just be cool to see another independent besides Notre Dame do well, although BYU is joining the Big 12 soon. But it would just be a new team, new face, a team who's treated more as a group of 5 team for now. It would be nice to see them break. It would be good to see them break out. They did in 2020, and I think they can do it again this season. And that's all I have to say for this video about BYU football. So if you're a BYU fan or a college football fan, I encourage you to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below on this channel. This is, of course, if you are on the YouTube. I'm looking to make this my first episode that I will upload to Spotify, which I'm going to be working on today, and how to upload my audio to that service, just to expand my horizons, I guess. So thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys around. About the Spotify thing, I'll put the link to that in the comment section of my next video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.